Hi, this video is going to go over how to find trig ratios. And in order to find a trig ratio, you need to determine your hypotenuse, opposite, and adjacent side first. Now, the hypotenuse is always the longest side, which looks like this one, but that's always not very accurate to go based off of because sometimes your diagrams aren't drawn to scale. So the safer route is to go directly opposite of the right angle. And the right angle is usually identified with a square because it's 90 degrees. So what's opposite of my right angle is the hypotenuse. From there, in order to determine the opposite and the adjacent side, you need to look at the angle that you're looking at in the problem. So because we're looking at this angle, it's shaded in, we're going to look at the adjacent first. Now, another word for adjacent is next to, close to. So this angle has two sides. One side is the hypotenuse, and the other side is the adjacent because it's right next to the angle that you're viewing. Opposite is pretty self-explanatory. It's on the opposite, the other side of the angle you're looking at. So if this is the angle you're looking at, the other side of the triangle would be your opposite. We just talked about how to do number 2 beforehand. And that was to find the longest side, but the better way to do it is to find the side opposite the right angle. So for numbers 3, A and B, take a minute and try to see if you could identify which side is labeled with an X. In the first case, we are talking about the side on the other end of the angle we're looking at. So this would be your opposite, since it's opposite the angle we are looking at. This, by the way, is a theta. That's just another word to identify your angle measure. So for the next one, here is theta, what we're looking at. The opposite would be here. Next to theta would be the adjacent because it's next to the angle. And of course, the side opposite the right angle, which is the hypotenuse, is our answer in this case. Now, to actually find the trig ratios, after you label them, you need to remember Sohcahtoa. Sohcahtoa would be SOH, so, CAH, which is AH, and TOA, which is OA. It stands for sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And tangent is opposite over hypotenuse. You need to remember Sohcahtoa in order to identify your trig ratios. We're going to put the first half labeling hypotenuse, opposite, and adjacent together with the second half of Sohcahtoa in order to get our trig ratios. So on to step number 5. First of all, the first 3 are very different than the second 3 because the first 3 tell me to look at angle A and the second 3 tell me to look at angle B. That means your opposites and adjacents, your labeling, is going to be different for the first 3 versus the last 3. So I'm going to do the first 3 first. I'm going to look at angle A. Now, it's actually nice enough here that all of my sides are labeled. And because they're all labeled with values, I can see automatically 13 is the largest number. This is my hypotenuse. It's also opposite of the right angle. Next to my angle that I'm looking at, angle A, is my adjacent, and 5 would be the opposite on the other side of the angle. From there, we're going to remember Sohcahtoa. So sine is so, which is opposite over hypotenuse. You're going to take a look at your triangle. My opposite is 5, my hypotenuse is 13. And then you're going to move on to the next one. Cosine, so CA, which is adjacent over hypotenuse. the adjacent is 12, my hypotenuse is 13. And then tangent, which is TOA, is opposite over adjacent. And that's going to give me my opposite is 5, my adjacent is 12. In order to do part B, you have to erase everything you just did. Not everything, your hypotenuse is still going to stay the same. But now you're looking at angle B. So you have to change it and identify a new opposite and a new adjacent, because now 5 is next to the angle you're looking at, and that would make it adjacent. And 12 is opposite the angle you are looking at. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. My new opposite value is 12 over 13. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. That means I'm going to be looking at 5 over 13. And then finally, tangent is opposite over adjacent. My opposite is 12, and my adjacent is 5. Sometimes your triangles aren't going to be nicely labeled like this. They'll give you 2 sides and you have to find a third. And in order to find that third side, you're going to have to use the Pythagorean theorem to identify all of the lengths of the triangles before you use Sohcahtoa. But we're going to go over that tomorrow. That's all.